I think we're currently live, Andy. So, mate, over to you. Kick it off. Here we go. Welcome to Wine and Wisdom, folks. Another Wine and Wisdom. But before we get cracking, Andy Fenton. Oh. Over to you, mate. Take it away. Mate, good job. And folks, the big news this week in Wine and Wisdom, as we've added an extra W, wine, wealth and wisdom. And so, folks, we've got a bunch of people online right now. So great to see you guys here. Give us a shout out in the comments. We're trying a little bit of new technology, Andy and I, and we've added a new word. There's a whole bunch of new things happening this week in wine and wisdom and wealth. So I think what shall we call it? Let's chuck it out there as a bit of a competition. Wealth, wine and wisdom. Wine, wealth and wisdom. What do you guys think? Wine, wisdom and wealth. Maybe chuck it out there to the audience today, Andy. But mate, you're really pumped about the last week, mate. I think you've been quite excited. You like a bit of politics, mate. We might kick off with that in a minute. But for those who are dialing in for the first time or coming back, welcome, folks, to Wine, Wealth and Wisdom. Andy Fenton over there in the black T-shirt and Jason Witten here in the black T-shirt. We got the memo. This is our uniform.
You got the memo.
Our Friday uniform. Gang, for the last 4 to 5 months, Andy and I have been getting together and debriefing on property, the world of property and finance, on the world of the share market, equities and banking, and helping our respective audiences and tribes through these trying times, which have been COVID, crazy times they have been. However, we've got a bit of a momentum on every Friday now. Glass of wine, debrief the week. And so that's what you're joining this week if you're here new. And we've been broadcasting across all of our platforms today with a new bit of technology. So welcome, Jason Witten, Andy Fenton, and welcome along. We've got a few guests in here. Bonnie, welcome. And someone there just said, good to see you, gents. I think I can add these things too. There we go. There's Bonnie. All three. Thanks. Good to see you, Bonnie. Can you see those, Andy?
Mate, I can. That Bonnie just flew across here.
Which is kind of cool. But I think Bonnie's pretty supportive on all three, wine, wealth and wisdom. So we're going to add them in as you go. David Lees reckons wine, wealth and wisdom and wine. Wine, wealth, wisdom and wine. 2 wines. David, mate, appreciate your support, mate. I love that one. It's a goodie. So, we might test it out, see how we go. But folks, listen, welcome along. Andy and I usually have a glass of wine on Friday afternoon, debrief the week that has been and how it affects our respective marketplaces in property and in the stock market, and maybe a little bit of how it affects our life in general as business owners, as entrepreneurs, as property investors. And so hang around. It usually takes us between, 40 minutes and 140 minutes to, debrief the week. But we've got some wine and usually it flows a little bit as we go along. So Emily is in the house. So how are you doing, Emily? Good to see you here. So Andy, I'm going to kick it off with you this week. There's the extra wine from Emily. She quite likes that one. So it's pretty cool. But, mate, the thing that's been on everyone's mind and everyone's vision for the week has been the election. So, mate, your world of the stock market, the equities, it gets a good pummeling or an up and down in these times. Mate, what's going on? What do you got to share with us this week? Why don't you kick it off in the world of equities? And, I might follow up a little bit later in the world of property. Actually, Bonnie, you're right onto it, Bonnie. Last week, I didn't have lunch, Bonnie, and I had 1 glass of wine, and I was slurring my words by the end of Wine and Wisdom. It was embarrassing. I won't do that this week. I had a big lunch this week, so I'm going to keep it together. But anyway, Andy, over to you, mate. Kick it off. I've been talking too much already.
Well, mate, I think I don't generally get excited by politics and elections and all of those sorts of things. But you know what an incredible period of time that we've been through and still going through. And I say that, you know, understanding the sort of the devastation that's happening around the world. But you know, we also have to have a look at some of the uniqueness and sit back, have a little bit of a laugh, and also, you know, look at some of the incredible events that are transpiring. And for anybody who's been watching the election, this is where we're at right now. So I do like the heading here is that the television network actually cut away as Trump tries to lie about the results, which is absolutely hysterical. I mean, who'd think that you'd have a president that actually manages to act like this? But Biden at the moment is in front, 264 to 214 on the Electoral College system. And if we just spot it down here, we can see the remaining states that are in play here. Nevada being one of the key states, and Pennsylvania, which is much talked about. Now, if you have a look, the light blue of Nevada says that Biden's just a little bit in front, and that's only by about 1%. So it's slim pickings through this. And Pennsylvania, where Trump is, and we'll talk about in a minute, talking about trying to stop the electoral votes from being counted and going to the courts for that. Not going to happen, people. He is an incredible street fighter or petulant child, one of the two. Doubt he's going to get that stopped. But Pennsylvania, just give you an idea of the statistics here. And for those of you who are interested, I've got this from The Guardian, and really great website for the election. It's been an absolute corker. It's my iWatch has gone off at 2-3 o'clock in the morning, multiple periods of time, and woken me up to election results updates. But there is less than 0.2% in some of these remaining states that are slightly red coloured over there on the East Coast. And really the difference that's breaking them up is really negligible. So as I said before we got into this whole election period, I said that the markets are going to be extraordinarily volatile coming into it, and they haven't disappointed, mate. We have seen some massive
charts, mate. Have you got some charts,
mate? So this is the S&P 200, and I know that this is an Australian index, but if we have a look here now, this I've chosen the month long results to show you here because the lead up into the election, and you can see November the 2nd there, the low point. So that peak to trough from left to right was reflects at about 5%, and then on the uptake, that's about a 6% swing. That 6% swing happened in about 2.5 days.
I was going to say in 2.5 days. And what is that in dollar terms, Andy? What is that in dollar terms?
Mate, it's a lot. I haven't got the data on that one, but it's a fairly sizable chunk.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
You can take that to the bank. It's a lot. But have a look at this. Look at this. Look at this. Look. Could you tell the difference between the US and the S&P 500, which is the US, and Australia? Look at it. Look at it. Look at it. Jeez. I mean,
that's crazy.
It's interesting to show how this is really playing out globally on markets and the actual effect of this election. Now, in our terms here, that's a 7% upward swing, and it went up further again today, which is really quite incredible. Now, as I said, there's a few things that are lining up with these results. So if you jumped in on the negative volatility over in the US and jumped into something like Apple or Tesla, you'd be up. Apple, you'd be up about 15%. If you jumped into one of the ones that we've been talking about more recently, which was
in a few days. In a few days.
Yeah, in a few days. This is the swing. This is the swing that we're talking about. Like literally 17% down, 23% ups, 13. Like it's unfathomable the kind of volatility, and markets don't like uncertainty. They really don't like uncertainty, and the problem is when you've got a bit of a time where you've got this happening. This was our old man. Basically, just the other day, he was playing a good game. As he said, he's winning, and then something happened, and he started to lose. And so, but it really was a little bit of a joke. And so, mate, he's officially got this title from me. So, for those of you who don't know what's actually happening, Trump has brought out the street fighting moves, and he's gone to the court system to try and cancel the postal votes. Because there's a high likelihood that if the postal votes come in, there are people who are going to be supporting Biden. Biden gets Pennsylvania. Biden wins. That's just the brass tacks of it.
Yeah.
The biggest challenge, though, in all of this is that effectively the Senate, and you might remember I brought not this fella. Well, who was it? I brought this fella up, and I said we don't want to see this guy. Right? We don't want to see the purple-headed monster turn up. And that is exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing basically equal representation in the Senate now. So looks like Biden will get in, touch wood. And as a result, we'll end up with a government that can barely govern because of the Republican. Yeah, they're basically the hung parliament. Thank you, Julie Fletcher. So it's going to be really interesting what will happen. That's kind of the worst case scenario as far as election results. We wanted somebody to be in power and be in power to be able to make decisions. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens as far as Americans are concerned and the American politics that plays out into the future. Because if you have a think about it, and even Trump's own party didn't really support Trump towards the end. So there's two outcomes that can come from this, is that we actually end up with a sort of bipartisan government that can actually govern because they're working for America again. And that could be because there was a big disconnect within Trump and his own party. So hopefully that does happen, because as we've seen in Australia from the sort of decade post-Howard, it didn't matter whether you're a Liberal or Labor. If you can't get legislation passed, if you cannot pass any laws or you can't do anything, then really you're just a figurehead. You're just you're a puppet on a stick, and that might
you're filling a seat for a few years, and then what else? Yeah.
And look, with everything that's happening as far as COVID, as far as political tensions, all of these sorts of things, you need to be able to make decisions. So it'll be really, really interesting. I don't think that markets are going to like this medium term, but markets have just gone absolutely gangbusters. Like there's no rhyme or reason to what's going on at the moment. It's just hysterical to watch. But one of the other things that, because we said that there are a number of big events that were happening. So obviously the election is still going. So we did call that. We sort of said that it's not going to be done on the night and probably for a number of days afterwards. This also means that the stimulus packages are not landing, and the stimulus packages are not landing over in the US. So all other things being equal, that should put some downward pressure on markets because we're not going to see that now, most likely until midway through January, possibly even February next year. So America potentially is going to go through some really, really tough times with COVID and no stimulus package to relieve them.
So you reckon after the general excitement of the election, markets flat or even declining a little bit, while they get their stimulus mojo on, you reckon?
Yeah, look, it's likely that you will see markets sort of buoyant, but falsely buoyant, because there's this, and we've been talking about it a little bit, but there's this term now called tech defense. Well, actually, there's not a term called that. I'm just going to coin it. We're going to call it tech defense. You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen.
Andy, yeah.
But they're calling the defensive trade to go into tech, right, over in the US. And you remember from last week, I said that the S&P 500, which is the American stock exchange, is actually up by 2%. But if you take away the top 5 tech companies, the whole index would be down by 4%. Now, that's 6% difference that 5 companies have made, which is incredible based on the size. So what's happening is that where people don't see stimulus dollars coming, instead of going into industrials, instead of going into banks, instead of going into these better dividend and better cash flow type of trades, they're going to go into tech. and they're called, and it's known as the defensive trade right now.
Well, I mean, let's face it. I mean, over this time, let's say COVID, those tech companies are the ones that have benefited significantly from this downturn, right? The banks had money out, so their assets turned into liabilities overnight, right? Because people ain't got jobs, they can't pay the mortgage. The real estate industry companies, struggled. They had a bit of a challenge. We're all locked at home. And then, who wins? Well, if you've got the internet on, people buy stuff on the internet. I've never ordered so much bloody Uber Eats. It's not funny, like unbelievable. We got Mark Camereri saying, "G'day, how are you, Mark? Good to see you flying in, brother." Yeah, Camo's there. All the way from Newcastle, lovely Nova Coastrian. So good to have you dropping by, brother. But yeah, listen, mate. It's an interesting one. Listen, I'm bullish on that stuff, and I don't know anything about the bloody share market, but I'm thinking, well, what did I use? What did I consume more than anything over this time? I didn't go and get more mortgages or pay more to the bank or take on more credit cards or anything. I put mortgages on pause. People put mortgages on pause, deferred payments, stopped all that stuff. But what didn't stop? My access to the internet, consumption of Netflix, ordering things on Amazon, and buying some food online. And there's Julie Lovely Fletcher flying in.
He's the tricky boy.
Yeah, great to see you, Jules. But yeah, mate, it's an interesting one, hey. So those big five companies.
Yeah, and so this is the defensive play, and this is what you and I have spoken about in different terms over the last month, 2 months, in that interest rates are now again hit a new low. So the RBA came out, they did the rate cut. It hit exactly where we said it was going to be landing. We said it was going to be landing there for about 4 months, I think, basically as soon as they did the last drop. So markets actually, interestingly enough, markets actually went down, and they just got hammered after that happened. Hammered by, I think it was about 5 or 6%. And usually markets rise on that, but I think everyone knew that it was coming, right? So we've had that election take place. So, but with interest rates so low, people are going to go to the new defense, right? And so that's where I say the tech defense, which is you would it's a growth stock, like, and the volatility is massive, but people are seeing that as a defense. And this is what you and I were talking about. What is the perception of defensive assets? And what is the perception is not necessarily the reality. So going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And so it's quite possible you could see these things run wild as people don't know where to put their money while there's no stimulus over in America. So that's obviously going to have a big impact down here. The other big news was the major banks actually reporting. And so for those of you who like a good read and are into this sort of geeky stuff, check out KPMG bank release. I read this today, and super interesting. These are some good stats from the bank, and I actually just talked to this one mostly. So this is the housing and SME, so small to medium business, temporary repayment deferrals. So these are the deferrals, and so you can see down the bottom we've got ANZ, then we've got CBA, NAB, and Westpac. If you look at the top, and you can see down the bottom we've got June, July, August, September. Right. So that if we have a look at CBA alone. That is 60 billion. That's B with a billion with a B. $60 billion worth of public. So Joe, everybody loans were put on deferment, and 15 billion with a B, Jason, in the small to medium enterprise. So that's commercial loans and things of that nature. CBA, you've sort of seen a decline in the amount of deferrals that have been on there quite rapidly coming into September, but ANZ pretty constant. NAB a bit of a falling trend. Westpac, there's sort of just basic noise there. So there is still standing as at the end of September, which was the end of the stimulus. There was $35 billion in domestic and $10 billion in commercial. with ANZ. There was 45. That's billion with a B, Jason, with CBA. Holy smoke. And then we have about 37 billion and about 35 billion with Westpac Bank. So don't have to be a genius to see the old T coming in there somewhere soon if they don't get a hold of it. Not really, just joking. It's going to be the 100 billion. But mate, pretty staggering kind of statistics that are then going to come to fruition over the next 3 to 6 months. So in that, there was an interesting release that, and probably my last one for today. So the theme of the report was really, with all of these loans deferred, and the reason why I kept on saying B with a billion with a B, Jason, is because I wanted to drive home the point. We've see the top line there. Operating income decreased by 1.7%. Now, this is across all of the banks. 1.7%. That was how much it decreased, right, from last year. So net interest income actually increased. Let me say that again. Net interest income
what's going on there?
actually increased. So you can do a little bit of math in between there and figure out what's being written in the background. But ultimately, and I think I said it last time, is I said that the results for the banks are probably not going to be great, but I don't think they're going to be as dark as everybody thinks that they are. And this goes to show and look, there's still plenty to play out in COVID, plenty to play out with the banks, but these figures are really quite staggering. So yes, the earnings on the banks were down about 6.7%. The shareholder returns, but ultimately their operating income only dropped by 1.7%, which I think is staggering, and most people wouldn't have picked that, and that shows really how much is going on.
Yeah, is that come on? Is that the big end of town accounting magic? Push it to the balance sheet or forward booked, or bring it how do they just because it's deferred doesn't mean it's not accounted for this year or whatever. Is that kind of some sort of play in there? I mean, have you looked into that part of town?
Look, no, the research report didn't go into that much detail from KPMG, but no, they won't have booked the forward revenue into their reports, and so it didn't go into a lot of detail as to where the additional had come from. But there had been a huge amount of loan activity, and as you said, on your side of the equation, you've seen people just go absolutely bananas, and so while people were deferring loans. Us in the business world, and if we wind back to when you and I first started Wine and Wisdom, we were telling every business owner to go out and get their hands on every damn loan that they can possibly get their hands on.
You can, and I'm still saying it now. I mean, right now, still again, I mean, those incentives for business owners are still out there. Never before have I ever experienced such easy access, low cost money. The government wants us to have some money in our hands and employ people and grow the country. And one way, shape or form, there's some inefficiency in there, but those loans are still available. 200 here, 10 grand there, 20 grand there. R&D grants boosted, you name it. And like you said, there's some employment loans going to employ young people, all sorts of stuff going on. I think it's going to be an exciting time to be an entrepreneur in the next 2 to 3 years. And those who can sort of wrap their heads around this stuff and take some considered risk, I think are going to be the winners in this stuff. There's a few people who sort of, rightly or wrongly rolled over, and COVID just, it's time to call it quits and, maybe pull up stumps and think about something else. And there's those who kind of, hunkered down and got through and, thinking, wow, okay, a lot of my competitors are gone. If I can get hold of some resources and get the right talent, it's time to really shine.
Look, having that conversation with clients and friends almost on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And the story is still the same. So for those businesses that are in the struggle areas or the future struggle areas, right? Because again, this stuff isn't over. And now more than ever, the war chest is just so important that you keep that or keep your hands on reserves, because there's going to be a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep, that's going to play out over the next 3 to 6 months across the board.
Yeah.
And being financially healthy like that and having the ability to deploy the reserves pragmatically, like when needed and when it's a calculated opportunity,
Yeah.
is going to see some businesses go from having thousands of competitors to 100 or tens. And I was having a chat with a one. I won't mention their name, but they're a wonderful human being who are in the travel industry, and they've just been decimated, and they're having to create segments of businesses that they never had before. And the advice was here is when JobKeeper kind of finishes, is not to maintain everybody employed and try and box on as best as you can, is probably to start to position the business now in order to get down to fighting weights, in order to be able to see a vaccine or see some sort of new world order come back together where we can start to fly and do all of these sorts of things again. And it will be in a new way. But their competitors are dropping like flies everywhere. And, it's like letting a Mortine bomb go in Uluru. It's just raining dead flies. And
Dead
I
flies
say
everywhere.
that it's a horrible thing. But if you position yourself right and you make the right decisions, then mobilizing shortly afterwards you may be one of 10 instead of one of 100 or one of 1,000.
Yeah.
And then when we come out of it, interest rates are going to be very, very low. So the ability for you to be able to scale and leverage that business is going to be unprecedented. So managing those reserves now, so critical, and not just for small businesses. Think about the big businesses. They can borrow money for peanuts.
Well, I was listening to a podcast in, I think it was called not Scaling Up, Masters of Scale. Excellent podcast if anyone wants to, in business or any entrepreneurial activity, Masters of Scale, Reid Hoffman. And they were talking to the CEO of H&R Block in America. And what they did over the COVID times is they drew down on their $2 billion line of credit of their business. So they drew it all down so they would have liquidity to win all the business, So and they've creamed it. They've doubled in revenue and all sorts of things, over this time. And they said, listen, we knew we needed that liquidity. We knew we needed that money because the H&R Block kind of pays you a little bit, and you get the cash now, but they make a margin later. It's almost like factoring your tax return. But mate, yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because over in my neck of the woods, in this stuff here, if you have a bit of a look at, where is all that money flowing? That money has been, you talk about those mortgages that were paused, and if you have a look in here, in the world of people's offset accounts, that money there's more principal being paid off. Okay, more principal being paid off. And more money sitting in offset accounts right now. So, not only is there cheap money available, but also one of the things that in my neck of the woods, when it comes to borrowers, it's actually never, not never, never's a big word, but this chart shows it is from the Housing Affordability Index right now, it's actually cheaper. It's more affordable right now in every single capital city of Australia than it has been in the last 10 years to borrow money to buy a house as an average wage. So even though wage growth has been literally non-existent, Andy, for the last decade, it's actually gotten cheaper in the mortgage space anyway to own a house. And that's a really interesting one. So there's more money sitting in people's offset accounts and mortgages than ever. I would argue probably people have appreciated their buffers and their war chests more than ever. And if you have a look at this right now, the mortgage repayments on these mortgages, are pretty insane. Like it's so cheap to own a home right now, I think that the money will start to flow out, and we're starting to see that millennial generation who avoided or couldn't get lending for a long, long time. Those guys are coming back into the marketplace, and they're entering the marketplace. So it's a really interesting, like it's never say never again. But it's interesting, man. There's actually, by and large, a lot more money in people's accounts than there was a year ago. That like cash liquidity, it's cheaper. There's more cash flow liquidity in people's lives right now than there was a year ago before COVID. It's a really interesting thing. Now, that might be a generalization for the people that I get to meet. Not
according to the statistics by KPMG.
Yeah.
There was significant growth in savings accounts, and one of the things that I started to think about and pontificate is that the reality is that banks don't want money in savings accounts anymore because they can't make money on it because there's no interest rate differential. They've got 0.1. It used to you got 1%, right? And now that's how much you used to get in your savings accounts, right?
Yeah.
You just everyday savings accounts. But now at 0.1, there's no money in it for the banks. There's no spread. So you're thinking, and I know that Julie's got a comment down there, would you fix your mortgage for 1.99%? Julie, I think that probably 2 years ago, if you'd ever said something like that to me, I'd say, you're mad, you got to lock it in.
Get on that. Yeah.
The reality is that the banks will make money through lending because there's still margin there. Yeah. And the difference between what they're borrowing it at and what they're lending it out at is significantly hundreds of times more or 100 times more than what the money on deposit is making them. Yeah, so I'm wondering whether there's the potential for that to be squeezed significantly over a period of time. I'm not saying not to. I think that for me, whether you lock in a mortgage rate or not really depends on a strategic cash flow position. Like, what is your strategy? If that matches your strategy, then you lock in a certainty. And if that works for your strategy, then you go for it because it's part of a bigger plan. But whether it can go lower, maybe it can. Like I remember 5 years ago, I said when you saw a 4 in front of it, it was like, grab it, lock it in.
Go for it.
That's inflation.
Yeah. Well, Andy, and this is one thing that I'm quite bullish at this point in time. This is actually this next decade is going to be the easiest decade to debt reduce if you lend money than ever in my history in 20 years or 30 years, because the interest cost is actually going to be so low, and your income is going to be so high. The differential, it's actually. I was running some numbers the other day. Most people can debt reduce. They can cut a normal mortgage in half. To 15 years rather than 30 years, from 8 out of 10 properties, if they're done properly right now. They can pay themselves off in 15 years. Now, I've never seen that in my entire investing career. Now, it may have been decades before, but for the last 20 years, other than kind of, this 12 months, it's been the other way around. You had to get growth. And, I think growth is going to come in real estate. I think there will, like you and I have chatted about this before, I think growth is going to come from the quality assets that we have, not the quantity of the assets. However, even if it doesn't grow at mad, crazy rates, I believe the low interest rates are going to allow us, if you're smart, and this is where we've got to be smart. I hope the lessons learnt from COVID for people about moving their zero line, their buffer line, making sure that they take care of their cash, making sure they have liquidity, making sure they understand, the value of, what happens if I have no income for 3 months? What happens? What happens to my life if that happens? Those lessons. And then, adjust your strategy as you go. Have a smashing debt reduction plan at the same time as an acquisition plan. Who knows where you could be in 8, 10, 15 years. It could be pretty cool, I think, So I'm excited about reimagining the strategies right now, mate, in my world of real estate. you're already talking about defensive assets are completely different than they were, 12 months ago. It seems like it could be a new frontier, Andy.
Look, and this sort of goes back to some of the ideas that I had for the thesis when I was thinking about doing a doctorate years ago. Can you imagine it, Dr. Fenton? God help.
I reckon you'd be great with as Dr. Fenton, mate. Dr. Fenton, he's in the house.
I do have the doctor's jacket. I'll wear it for the next Wine and Wisdom. When we talked about it, and we were talking about when this money has to be repaid from the Australian government, we're talking about $1 billion a day. It's $1 billion a day, and that's going to be hard for any treasurer to kind of swallow. And any idea of increasing rates in the medium term is just going to exacerbate the pain that governments have. So my theory that sort of my thesis was based around was the velocity of money, in that the fact that money can move around so much faster now means that there might be a new normal of leverage, so that you and I might start our lives with $100,000 worth of debt because that's our zero game, right? And that's because of how quickly money spins around the system. It's quite in-depth sort of thesis, but when you think about it from this perspective of governments have now gotten to zero, and you and I talk about it all the time, is lending based on risk rather than lending based on a fixed rate, which turns borrowing into a really quite a simple game, and it turns investing in borrowing into an even more simple game than what it was. Right? Basically, what is the risk of Jason Witten, paying off a loan? And that will come into, do you have life insurance? Do you have steady income? Are you working in a strong career? Now, some might say that this is going to be discriminatory, and it probably would be, right? Because it's based on risk. So if you're in an occupation which has a high risk associated with it, then you as an individual will have a higher risk rating. You might have a very strong salary, and you might be in a sector that is almost guaranteed employment. But then if you don't have the life insurance, you might be paying 6%.
Yeah.
Get life insurance, you might be paying 2%. And to me, this makes a whole lot more sense than having arbitrary numbers set by the Reserve Bank of Australia, because ultimately that system is really there for the banks, and so that the banks can make money by stimulating money into the economy. But now we've seen, rises of companies which are larger than the banks, which have more capacity than the banks, the Apples, the Amazons, the Googles of the world.
The intermediary, right? The role of that intermediary is changing significantly, right?
And you could think about it would be based on the property that you're buying. Is it in a growth area? Is it in a blue chip area? Okay, you're going to get a lower interest rate. It's a better bet.
Yeah.
It just makes more sense to me that we go in that direction, more so than going back to some sort of new rising interest rate environment. And I think, well, if we go that way, you heard it here first. And what an exciting place to play. And we're already seeing it. And as blockchain evolves, I think that this thing will just naturally start to happen. And probably with the
Yeah. And chatting with my business partner Sam Saggers, you've met Sam, and we serve property investors across Australia and New Zealand. That's our primary customers we serve and our tribe. But right now, Sam has had 5 conversations in the last week. First, starting with his mum. His mum is in her late 70s. Now, she had a few dollars. Let's call it a fair bit more than 500, but a little bit less than $1 million in the bank, and that's what she was living off. She was living off the returns on the cash and in defensive assets, and it was the death nail. It was the death blow. The 0.01 cash rate. It's literally worth nothing, and now she, for the first time in over 15 years, is taking her cash out of the bank, and she's going to buy a property.
Bitcoin.
Cash outright. No, she's going to buy Bitcoin. No. And, really interesting things. And, and Sam said as soon as his mum had those conversations with him, all of her friends sort of said, well, I need to speak to Sam. So, it's interesting for me to hear, the 70-somethings coming out of the woodwork going, getting 0.001 on my cash or whatever, 0.1 on my cash is just rubbish. I'm willing to take it out and I'm willing to buy something cash outright to get a return now. That hasn't happened for 20 years or longer. I don't know. I haven't been around in that space that long, to really sort of understand what happened there. The older generation relying on those defensive assets, that's not going to happen. The young generation who've been literally locked out of owning properties for over 20 years, between 10 and 20 years because of the expense now, are like, holy shit, I can buy something for the cheapest that's like it's ever been. And, everyone in between, when it comes to lending and real estate, I'm pretty pumped about the next few years, what that mix is going to be. I think it's going to be a bit of a mess, to be honest. But it's going to be an interesting mess where there are going to be some winners and there are going to be some losers in that game. But I think everyone's going to win when it comes to the cost of lending. And if you're smart, like you said, about what you use the lending and your leverage for, if you're considered, you're smart, and you're focused on your outcome, the resources are there for those who want to grow their capacity in business or in investing, through those mechanisms. And I think it's going to get easier. The whole system.
It's going to get easier. It's getting easier, Jason, because they're and I love this headline. Check out this for an oxymoron or just moron. The responsible lending laws are being repealed. Just listen to that. Listen to that coming out of the mouth of a politician. We're repealing the responsible lending laws. We're repealing the responsible lending laws. So what's on the opposite side of responsible?
Well, I would say irresponsible, Andy. Is that the right answer you're looking for?
So we're back to irresponsible lending back in Australia.
Well, I was just chatting with a lender only a week ago, and some of their products were almost curling my toes back in the days when I remember lending money from a mob called Caesar Mortgages, and they were out of Scotland. They were underwritten by the Bank of Scotland, and they allowed you to capitalise 50% of your interest because properties would always go up. So, so I had a 7% loan. I capitalised 3.5%, and I only had to pay 3.5%. My rent was 5%. I was pocketing the difference, and literally, it was like for 5 years, it all went pear-shaped in the GFC. ASIC said that was irresponsible lending, and I didn't have to pay the capitalised portion of my loan. It was crazy.
Maybe we can start it back up again. What was it called?
It was no-doc lending as well. Like, do you want the loan? Yes, thanks. And it was crazy. So,
are you really Jason Witten?
Well, yeah, according to me.
Yeah. Sorry, Trent. Yes.
So, I certainly, while I laugh about it, I don't think it. I certainly wouldn't condone madness like that again. However, getting simple, quality access to funding is something that's important. And APRA went too far. They absolutely fucked it. And as far as I'm concerned.
That's the beautiful irony that is that they called it responsible lending in order to drive home a point, which was their agenda, right? So they had an agenda, and this is typical of politics at the moment. And I think that this is where everyone really needs to just wake up, listen to hear, and actually start to process and make some judgments on this sort of stuff, because the politicians are doing some crazy shit right at the moment, and sort of getting away with murder. But this is a classic example. They had an agenda. They executed the agenda through a royal banking inquiry. They highlighted certain parts of it as the billboard. They found some pretty nasty stuff, and they flew that up like a flag, and then put a blanket approach and sort of killed the industry. And they called it responsible lending, right, in order to be able to have that kind of emotive impact on people, right? So now we're safe because we're responsible. It was draconian, and it was overreaching. It was sort of a dictatorship style move in order to control the system. And this is one of the challenges with Australia. I mean, we tend to be a little bit of certainly in Victoria, we're the nanny state. I think I've brought up a few times. Molly Meldrum fell off a ladder, and then they wanted to make helmets mandatory for everyone on a ladder, for Christ's sake. But this is an example, and repealing this isn't going to irresponsible lending. It's actually going, well, the government's going, well, we actually need you guys to get mobile so that the economy can operate efficiently. And so there's the gap. So should they have called the responsible lending philosophy repealing efficient lending? We're going to make inefficient lending in the economy in order to be able to serve our needs. And so now they're making it more efficient out in the marketplace. And as we see that roll through, it's going to be extraordinarily interesting. And that dovetails into the business owners or investors as well, who keep their powder dry and then have the ability to show good revenue, even if it's backed by some of your war chest, because you will have to qualify for the loan still, but they will be easier to qualify for.
Yeah. And, some of that interest-only lending and 90% lending will come back, and it's already sort of back on the table for the right borrower. And
it has to come back, Jace. It just fundamentally has to come back. There are going to be areas of real estate that are going to fall in value, and there's going to be large areas of real estate that fall in value, and not the good stuff, but the big farms of properties that every third house is the same. In certain areas, they're going to fall in value, and the bank can't foreclose on everybody because they breached their 80%.
No. And
so they have to repeal it.
And they have to, and reality was and has been, 2017, 2018 saw a significant drop in the median value of house pricing across Australia, and that was driven by one thing that changed in the lending world. Right, it had nothing to do with the quality of real estate or anything like that. It was the APRA threshold for interest-only lending enforced on the banks. And the banks, in blanket statement, went, if your interest-only lending phases up, you're going back to principal and interest, right? And it's such the most ludicrous concept, because it was actually contravening the actual lending law, that they were forcing people to go into principal and interest payments, and they actually couldn't afford to make the principal interest payments, right? So how fucked up was that? In the lending world, the consumer continued to make the interest-only payment no problem. That's what they qualified on. And now they're being forced to go to principal and interest. And if they were to run the servicing calculator on that customer today on the principal interest loan, they wouldn't qualify for the loan today. But they're forcing them into that loan by a draconian measure, a dumb, stupid measure. And a lot of people had to sell properties. It wasn't like a disaster like the GFC, but a lot of people were forced to sell properties because their payments went up 30, 40%. On those properties, and it was just like, oh, now it's turned my positive cash flow property into a negative cash flow property. And, they had a plan. Many in my world had buffers in place for those things, but there was, one in every 20, one in every 30 that simply couldn't sustain 5 properties going from interest only to principal and interest. It was draconian. So, mate, it was a dumb lending concept, and it was a bit of a witch hunt, really. I think, take me down that rabbit hole there, where the conspiracy theory of the big institutions wanted the business back, and they sort of got in the ear of government and said, "Oh, listen, brokers and independent financial planners and all these other people, they're the problems. Just let us take care of it. But it kind of backfired a little bit on the institutions there. But mate, at the end of the day, the outcome for us now is access to efficient, quality lending, so we can all, use those resources and go for it. Because Andy, you've said this: there's more money in circulation, there's more wealth in circulation than ever in history, right? And the idea, it's actually pretty naive, I believe, to sit anywhere in the world and go, lending, the problem is leverage, the problem is lending. It's not going to go away. Money has to be put to work, right? And lending is a form of assets going to work. It's one of the oldest forms of money going to work, right? So, it's an interesting thing. It's never going to go away. Those who are afraid of debt, my sort of, 90% seriousness is get over yourself and learn about debt, understand how to use debt in a wise way, not a stupid way. And if you want debt to be safer, then don't borrow such a high LVR and keep a higher buffer and, choose good assets. But lending is actually something really important for those who aren't born into wealth, Andy. That's one of my things. Like, if you and I came from humble beginnings and all you've got is a job and you save your butt off and get 10 grand, mate, the only way you're going to get ahead in the world is using leverage, using lending. And, old mate who's third or fourth generation, got 100 million in the bank and they take care of the family office. I mean, it's disproportionate advantage for that person. So I think leverage and lending is super important for the world of opportunity. You'd have to learn how to use it well.
Well, and the government step in, and I'm having a government bashing session today, and I'm really punching the living shit out of but there's backwards thinking and there's commercial thinking, and they try and curb and create nanny type provisions by curbing free market trade, right, which is market lending, and say that it's irresponsible. But riddle me this, Batman. Like you repeal stamp duty, you get rid of stamp duty, and you halve capital gains tax. What does that do? All of a sudden, if you do need to sell, you can sell, right? Because even if it's a small lot, you're not going to get smashed with 5% stamp duty plus and above. You're not going to get smashed with tax and all of these sorts of things that make the exchange of property quite challenging to do.
Yes.
And if you adjusted the tax, they would probably end up getting more taxation revenue because there would be more turnover of property. And there'd be less chances for people to get into serious mortgage stress because it can happen so quickly. Because literally, you buy a property, and as soon as you buy a property, if you sell it, depending on the value of the property, you're 30,000 plus your realtor and your legal fees. So you sell a property, and you're in debt to the government about 30 grand straight off the bat, your average property, and you've got 15K real estate bill and a 5K conveyancing bill or whatever it costs. So you 20,000
because you borrowed at 90%, you don't get that back. It's rubbish. Yeah, you're dead right, mate. I quite like New Zealand's version of the world. They charge more GST on the property, and now they're charging capital gains tax on trading activity, but not on personal ownership. So people who own their own things, I think it's a good idea, mate. And it was meant to be bloody done. The governments, they backed out of this. Stamp duty was meant to be abolished when GST was brought in. And the cheeky pricks, they kept the GST and they kept the stamp duty in. It was meant to be phased out. Bloody New South Wales brought in an exit tax as well. It tanked their marketplace, I tell you.
How else do you get paid $400,000, $440,000 a year with an economy that's not earning any money?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, let's put some more taxes in there. That's it. That's great. Mate. So listen, I'm a big fan of understanding leverage and using lending wisely. You know, it's if you do use it wisely, it'll be your friend. And to be honest, Andy, you know, most banks are actually quite nice people if you've got genuine situations. Like they are they're not draconian people who send the cronies around. You know, genuine people who get into genuine strife. The banks 9 times out of 10 will treat you genuinely really nicely, and that's, you know, that's what I love about Australia. You know, that's what I love about our system. You know, for the most part, you're going to be treated well, and if you have a shitty time, you're not going to end up in the gutter. You know, we've got a welfare system, we've got a medical system, we've got a reasonably fair political system. You know, they're just a few clowns in the system, but you know, that's the way it rolls. But you know, at the end of the day, it's a pretty good place to live. You know, so we can't complain too much, can we? Really, at the end of the day, but we can make good decisions, and that's, you know, what, you know, Friday Wine and Wisdom's all about. You know, trying to make better decisions based on the resources we've got to take care of the things that are important to us. You know, as we go along. But mate, I might throw it out there as we sort of maybe, you know, bring this one in for a landing. I didn't drink too much today, so I'm not slurring my words at the end of the. And I had a good lunch, which was awesome. But if anyone's got any questions before we might, you know, sign off, Wine, Wealth and Wisdom, the new, and our new broadcast studio here, kind of fun. Hopefully, it was kind of cool. I can put Andy on the right. There he goes. I can put him back to the left. I can say, Andy, it's all you. And I can say, hey, it's all me. That's kind of cool. And we can be back together. Which way am I going? Add me to the right. There we go. It's kind of fun. But if anyone's got any questions, chuck them in the chat. But gang,
just before we go, so hit the like button if you reckon this guy is going to win. I'd love to. So this is the best way we can do a poll. So hit the like button if you reckon this guy is going to win. All right.
Chuck it in there. Where's the like? Like the subtitles.
And then if you think this guy is going to win, where is he? He's here somewhere. Hang on, he's behind here. If you reckon this guy is going to win, hit the love button. So I want to see a little poll here and see how we go with them. So this is.
Okay, I'll put you on solo, Andy. So you got the whole screen. It's all you.
So this is the future of the free world. So hit like if you reckon that Biceps Biden is going to be the leader of the free world, or if you think that Batman's nemesis, the Trump, is going to be, hit the love button. We'd love to see what your thoughts are, and don't be shy. If you reckon it's going to be Trump, put it in there. We won't track you back down and then list your names out in the next Wine and Wisdom. Maybe, possibly not.
Well, we did have one question there from David Bellamy. David, good to hear from you, mate. Great to see you on. Would you change an interest-only loan to a principal and interest? And so it's obviously a big question, but for me, David, part of the strategy when it comes to lending is if you have the right interest-only loan set up, which is an interest-only loan with an offset account available, and depending on what loan it is, whether it's your principal place of residence or your an investment property, then 9 times out of 10, I would show you that it's better to keep a interest-only loan going and make extra payments if you choose to. So make a principal payment if you want to, but sit it in the offset account. And 9 times out of 10, sit it in the offset account of a owner-occupier property. And so, David, mate, I hope that makes sense. But if it doesn't, hit me up on direct message on Facebook. Happy to talk to you about it, because it's a simple one, but it's a powerful one to understand. The interest-only contract with you and the lender is the agreement you have. It does not mean you can't make extra payments. You can make extra payments on an interest-only loan. It's just a commitment to the payments. So you can make as many extra payments as you want if you set it up properly. I suggest you don't make extra payments into the loan. I suggest you put them in an offset account. Okay, you have a 50-50. Then, David, if it's your principal place of residence and you are in the back stretch of life, as Andy and I would say it, and you don't need access to that money for liquidity, then I would just make the principal payment and get on with it and smash your loan down. But if you need access to that money, if it's important, those extra payments, you don't want to have to beg for that money back to the lender, then I would never give it back to them in a principal payment. I would sit it in my offset account, or I would sit it in my PPR offset account, or depending on where the most interest is being charged. So hopefully that makes sense, mate, but happy to chat to you on a quick Zoom. If you want to have a bit of a yarn, mate, hit me up. So as you go.
That's interest only, but not to be confused with fixed for a period. Because if you do fix a period, so just a subtle difference, but people often confuse them. But if you do fix, sometimes you'll be restricted to, if you fix the period of time on interest only, then you might be restricted to paying 20% of capital over the life of the fixed term. Those are a little bit of the fine print that you've got to read, but I'm 100% in the same camp as Jace there. It's for me, it's all about cash flow and budgeting, like what makes sense from a cash flow and budgeting perspective. If you think that you're going to need it, then sometimes paying a little bit more, if it is more than principal and interest, sometimes paying a little bit more can be a good idea, so that it's sometimes just a cheap credit card, if that makes sense.
It's exactly it. And Nicole said, do you use the same offset account for both home and investment? 9 times out of 10, Nicole, there's zero reason to have an offset account in an investment on an investment property. Okay, if you've got a home loan, a principal place of residence that is not tax deductible, there's really only a need to have one offset account, and that's on your own home, your principal place of residence. All money, all extra coin, even your rents and your tax deductions, everything goes into your offset account and it clears out of that one account. And even if money's in there for a day, it'll save you, 10 cents, 20 cents, $1. And the compounding effect of that money left in an offset account over the next 30 years can save you, a lot of dough. So one offset account, it's the central one. And if you're smart with how you use that money, then all of your rents, all of your depreciation, everything goes into the one spot and then clears out of that account as you go. Use your principal place of residence to reduce the debt, because it's not tax deductible. So as you roll along. But good question, because like Andy said, sometimes it can be a little bit confusing. Offset account, principal and interest, fixed interest only, redraw facility, splits. There's a lot of acronyms and descriptions that sometimes they all sound the same, but they're not the same, especially when it comes to the tax man, especially when it comes to, actually getting the offset account applying to the right spot. So, that might be a good conversation for next time. So great to have everyone online today. Hopefully everyone enjoyed today's wine, wealth, and wisdom, as we've dubbed it, the 3 W's. Yes, keep it in the offset account, not put it in the principal, Nicole. Absolutely. Now, Nicole, it depends on the stage you're at, and you're part of our mentoring program, so you understand these words, and Andy has the same type of descriptions, the acquisition, the consolidation of the lifestyle. If you're an acquisition or consolidation, having liquidity, access to that money and capital when you need it without having to beg for it back from the bank is super important. Absolutely super important. In the consolidation part of your life where you are debt reducing, borrowing might not be that important. It depends on your strategy, but you're deleveraging at the back end of your life, not keeping the leverage open. So, it is a good question, and that's where, chatting with Andy and myself, at the right time is going to be important for everyone, to get the timing right. Because it's not the same for everyone, but, it will be powerful if you get it right. So.
And mate, there's just one there from Julie as well, which I saw just a little bit further up, saying, do you think that they'll... Yeah, there you go. Jeez, look at you. You're a bit flash tonight with all of this technology.
Right
look at
right
you. Yeah. I get a little bit lighter every time I have a technology conversation with you. I think that my take on this, and this is just what I believe. I think in Australia, we talk about keeping your powder dry, and unfortunately, and again, we're talking politics, but you can't leave politics out. And I'm sorry that I'm probably sounding contentious to some people, but the reality is that politics is a part of markets at the moment. There's a lot of talk in America about the welfare system. The health system shouldn't be politics, and it shouldn't be linked to politics, but it is, and it's being wielded like a weapon. I would find politically, I would suggest that it would be very, very good move for them not to drop any more stimulus, and then just drop a really great budget, right? Because that allows them to really control that it's not a stimulus, it's just a cracking budget to get Australia back on track. I don't think it's the right thing to do. But there's, with Victoria coming out of COVID-19, without the sensationalist headlines, which will come, by the way, as unemployment continues to rise, and all of these things that will just naturally happen as a result of severe lockdowns and the repealing of the stimulus. I think you're going to see that they're probably going to keep their powder dry until budget time, which is going to be March and April, and you can bet your bottom dollar that Jason and I will be waxing lyrical about all of the various different changes that are going to be happening then. And I reckon that they're turning their minds right now to what they're going to be doing come April next year when they launch the budget, because then isn't it election year next year? I've been so caught up with America, I'm not even sure whether it is for Australia. But if it is, then
I rely on you and Shay for all things politics. I can tell you that one right now. Mate, wrong bloke to ask. Maybe Steve Matthews, if he's still listening, he'd know. Steve, is it an election year next year, or even Shay, she'd know.
It just, to wrap that one up, there is stimulus that is available between now and the end of the year, and that comes in the form of the ability to access JobKeeper. It comes from the ability to access the instant asset write-off, which has just been expanded almost limitlessly. So there are a lot of measures in place that you can use. And I think go back to the stimulus package marked budget. But to go back to the stimulus package, and maybe we should do a recap on it, Jace, just to let everybody know, because I think a lot of it got lost with the craziness that is. But there's still a fair.
I think that'd be good, mate. I think that'd be great. I'm going to I'll show you guys. I don't know if you can see which way is
upside down.
Upside down. Anyway, I've been buying some equipment over there, getting the instant write-off. You're probably all feeling a bit sick now with my.
How much did it? What was in this?
What was in that wine?
So there's Mr. Whitten keeping Apple afloat. It's the reason why they hit the $2 trillion market cap. But by November 28th, 2020, we have an election. So, look, to me, it makes such sense. And unfortunately, I hate to say it, that COVID would be used as a political platform. But let's face it, that's what's happening here. It's what's happening globally. And put yourself in the same shoes. You'd probably end up doing something similar. You can release it a little bit earlier, or keep your powder dry and be the budget, or bring the budget that brings Australia out of the COVID-19 recession that apparently the RBA said we don't have. But
before it began. That reminds me of a Rodney Root song.
Rodney Root song. And then it was over.
Before it began. Well, we might need to end it before we go too far here, Andy. But one last question from Melinda. It said, what if you own investments but not a PPR? Set up an offset account for the investment. The answer is yes, Melinda, absolutely. And the caveat is, unless you've got other debts that are even more expensive than your investments, which are usually things like car loans, furniture loans, credit cards, those things, you should get rid of those debts if possible, because they do consume things, which is your borrowing power. But it all depends on what you're trying to achieve. So check in with your advisors and your coaches before you do that. But yes, the money should be somewhere.
And on a lot of the car loans, you got to check the terms and conditions, because a lot of the time paying off car loans or equipment loans, it actually makes no difference, because they build in all of the future interest into the forward part of your payment schedule. So if you do, let's just say you had a $100,000 loan which had a flat 5% for 5 years, it had $25,000 worth of interest payable. If you paid it out in year 3, the $25,000 would all be still within that payment cycle. So in which case, it makes no sense to pay out the car loan. So this is, again, where you just got to read the terms and conditions. And when I do a lot of presentations in around small business world, I quite often say, and I use Donald Trump as an example, actually, read the deed or read the documents. I know that they're boring and they can probably put an amphetamine freak to sleep, but ultimately you want to, if you're signing something that is half your salary, like, it makes some sense just to read through the T's and C's, which are terms and conditions, because we just, in today's world, we sign so much stuff. And when it's related to lending, at least have them explain it to you. And that's the thing. So ask the question, okay, because if you don't want to read it, because let's face it, look, at mortgage documents are like that. Like, I get it. Like, you're not going to sift through them. You literally
take your eye out, Andy. Like,
just be highlighting the whole way through it. But ask the people that you're getting the loans with, what can I pay it out early? Does it make sense to pay it out early? What are the ramifications if I pay it out early? Just ask the basic questions, and then you'll get a good idea as to which place.
Oh, where you sit. Yeah. Well, mate, been great to chat with you, and been great to have interactive crowd with us this week. So thanks for supporting us, gang. Happy Friday, happy wine, wealth, and wisdom to all of you guys. And Andy, you've got one last thing to do, so I'll hand over the screen to you.
Whoops.
Do the video, Andy. Do the video. All right, Andy, come back.
Oh, I don't know what's going on. I'm blowing up.
Cheers, mate. Thanks for a good chat, mate. And thanks to everybody. Thanks for joining us. Join us again next week. Another wine, wealth, and wisdom.
Have a great weekend.
All right. Cheers, gang.